I think tier lists are the shortest way of kind of conveying what you think about a cast of characters, but they don't really provide much details. And I think that matchup charts are even better, except they also lack details. And so the details are kind of where the chunk of the info is. The problem is sharing all that just takes a long time. And so I'm hoping that my presentation of this tier list will be some kind of compromise on how much data I can share and making sure it's not too much. My rankings here will be S will be exceptional. A will be consistent, B will be inconsistent, C will be flawed, and D will be unplayable. For the most part, my tier list should reflect kind of like the nuances between the different characters once you get to the point where both players are very competent and understanding the matchup and the options. I have some notes here as well. I'll explain my notes as we go through it, but I kind of wrote down the pros and cons of each character and their matchups. You'll notice a plus plus, a single plus, a minus, and a double minus. Those represent like the extreme matchups. The plus plus is heavily favored. The negative negative is heavily not favored. So let's start with Dive. So Dive, I'm not putting him in unplayable. I'm just kind of putting him out there so we can kind of see that this is the person being talked about. His pros are he has a very good jump height and angle, 45 degrees and decent speed. That gives him pretty much decent movement in the game. I mean, he's really good at holding his own space and moving around, and his keg factor can be very dangerous with that height and angle. And his cons are he's just average. Nothing really jumps out because I think that they balance the game off of Dive. Okay, this is the person that no one should be obscenely better than or obscenely worse than, and it kind of shows. I think that Dive has options against pretty much the whole cast, and he doesn't really have any swingy matchups represented by my notes here. I know that he does have some advantages, like with Jefailey, he can do some headshots with his high jumps, but he also gets headshot by Jefailey. Kung can hit him and keep him at bay, but if he gets kick factor or uses his ground special well, he can basically stop Kung from doing that. I wanted to just focus on the extreme matchups, and he doesn't really have any, and so that's why names are just missing here. When we move forward, you'll see that names will start to pop up in that matchup list. Okay, so we're just going to put him at a solid A, very consistently strong in terms of if you play him, you're not really fearing a counter pick, and you can probably do well by bringing him to a match where you're not sure who you might be playing, and so he can hold his own. Now, Dr. Shoals is a polarizing character. There's a lot of newer players that I think want to put her up here, and when you first get into the game, she feels very strong. The way that she can jump up high really quickly and just kick with two angles, it's very good. And that's not even considering her special, which gives her even more air mobility. But once you kind of get into the higher levels, then she becomes even more dangerous because of that air special, which allows her to pause in the air, make turnaround kicks, and basically allows her to be the best headshot chainer in the game. And what I mean by that is if she lands a headshot, she has the ability to follow that out with headshots after that, and because of the way that she controls the air and can close really fast with her horizontal kick. I don't think any other character kind of beats her in that category. There's a lot of other characters that can come close, but I feel like Dr. Shoals does that the best. As you start to understand Dr. Shoals, you'll figure out that she basically has no ground game, which is against the foundation of regular dive kick characters, where normally you move along the ground and you try to fight using dive kicks. Because she doesn't have a ground game, other characters can exploit that, and she only jumps so high. So once she starts playing characters that jump higher than her, she just tends to have trouble. If she can utilize her air special well, she can still deal with those higher jumpers, but she definitely has to struggle against any character who can easily get above her. As you can see, her best matchups are against Jefailey, Johnny Gat, Baz, and her other worst matchups are probably Mr. N and Fencer. Ground game's usually needed to kind of stifle Fencer, and the roll from Fencer can get around a lot of what Shoals can do. So those are her most polarizing matchups. She's slightly ahead in the kick game, and Redacted is slightly ahead of her because that's also another high jumper that can duck underneath her kicks. So I put her at the A tier, and I'm gonna put her kind of behind I'll have the leftmost side be the stronger side, although I think everyone in the A is probably, similar. But just for the sake of being specific, let's go ahead and put her on the right side of Dive for now. All right, let's move on. We've got Fencer next. This is another character I want to say that a lot of players will want to put up here. It's hard to show without playing kind of why I disagree with that notion. On paper, the sword projectile from Fencer is fast and large. It's a very good attack. But as you start to examine Fencer more, you notice that he has a minimum kick height, which makes his movement really, really chunky. And he has a very small kickbox, which he'll lose pretty much or trade most of the time if you get into a foot-to-foot clash. And one of the bigger things, his kick factor gives him an additional win condition, but it doesn't increase his speed. And normally, if you're facing another character, you want to not leave them alone, because if they build up kick factor, they become this juggernaut. And Fencer just doesn't have that. And so a lot of the optimal play against Fencer is just letting Fencer come to you, because you just can't really build a threat if you don't come to him. Now, that's all assuming that you can separate Fencer from his sword and prevent Fencer from getting his sword again. Because if you let Fencer do that, then he could be a monster. And I want to put him in C. No, actually B. So B is my inconsistent category, and I feel like Fencer, while being great with sword, is awful otherwise, except for specific matchups. And in this case, the matchups I have listed are horrible against Redacted. Redacted can use Feral to duck sword whenever she wants, and she's a wall. Basically, she can defend anything that Fencer brings up. As far as the good matchups, he does well against Mr. N and Dr. Shoals. Mr. N, because of the large hurt box, he can do what they call a stab and grab. A stab and grab for Fencer is when you hit someone with a sword and immediately pick it back up. It's one of the best moves you can do as Fencer, because you use your special to get a kill and you still be able to reload it for the next turn. Getting your sword back is the problem with Fencer, and if you can do more stab and grabs, then you have a higher chance of winning. Against Dr. Shoals, I said earlier, his ground roll can do wonders, and so he doesn't even really need sword. Sword just is icing. Jefailey is, I want to say, like the Dan of Divekick. He's hilarious to play. His head grows as you play, and I've got to say, when he gets to kick factor, he's pretty scary. He's the only charge character in the game, and when I say charge, I'm referring to you hold the kick button, it builds his ego into his feet, and the longer you hold it, the faster his kick will be. He has a drop kick, so it kind of just angles downward after it shoots forward. This is a pretty strong kick at full charge, and it takes about 5 seconds to get a full charge. But if you get kick factor, you don't have to charge at all, and you just have boom kicks all the time. And so it can be very scary if you're facing a Jefailey who has kick factor, but it also kind of limits him in his approach. If all you have is a haymaker and that's all you can do, it's like, well, moving, trying to control your movement while you have it is really hard. And so the biggest thing holding him back is his head size. It grows every round, and that's kind of like the fundamental problem with him is, even no matter how well you're doing, if you get headshot when you have a large head, there is a good chance that the other person's going to bring it back. He is probably the #1 character to suffer from chokes, and that's if you are about to fraud someone with 4 wins and all of a sudden you lose a round and you're headshot, they can easily chain you for 5 headshots in a row. I'd say that's the biggest thing holding him back. He's still a playable character. I know a bunch of people who play him really well and deal with that deficit, but I would definitely put him at the, not necessarily bottom of this list, but because D is unplayable, but he has some core issues, and mainly just being the head size. As you can see, his matchups here, he does have issues with Uncle Sensei, Dr. Shoals, and Mr. N. These are all characters who can chain him very easily. I'd say Uncle Sensei versus Jefailey is the worst matchup in the game. Uncle Sensei's super jump just dominates that matchup. He can get up and above Jefailey whenever he wants, and so he can headshot Jefailey whenever he wants. He does have a little bit of an advantage against Markman, but I'd say that it really depends how Markman rolls on his item searches. Most of the time, the normals of Markman are really bad, and Jeff can basically corner Markman and just charge up for a win. The problem is if Markman gets up kicked, then that all changes. If Jefailey is pressuring correctly, though, he should have the advantage most of the time. I say most of the time because, yes, there is RNG in finding that precision mode and up kick for Markman. All right, let's talk about Gat. I kind of want to leave him here on unplayable, but I don't think that that's fully true. So let's go down to my Gat notes here. His biggest tool by far is his kickback. It's very fast and retreating, and combined with his outstretched hitbox allows him to counter kick pretty quickly and get out of the way, except it is a bit of a double-edged sword because you do tend to jump too far back if you don't end up kicking. His outstretched box allows him to play the ground game decently well. He's not as fast as kick, but his ground game is probably better than dives on the surface level without any specials. And that's kind of where his pros end. Both his specials require a commit jump. So I wrote this down specifically to point out that whenever you jump in Divekick, you're basically committing to an action that is somewhat predictable because you can land, unless you have air options to get out of it. Now, Johnny, when he needs to do his specials, both specials force him to jump. Finding time to do that safely in Divekick is pretty tough. And on top of that, the specials just aren't that effective compared to the rest of the cast specials. They can't really guarantee him a kill. They manipulate the situation where you might have better knowledge or better handle, but for the most part, the rest of the cast have oppressive specials. Not to mention that his kick factor also is very gambly. His kick factor, when you activate it, his partner Shandi comes out and shoots dubstep bullets, and if it hits the other character, they get confused in terms of their buttons swap for about a second. You get 8 seconds of that, but if you say 8 seconds, you don't really get 8 seconds of confusion. You get 8 seconds of bullets trying to hit them, and these bullets travel across the screen pretty slowly, and then when they hit, they only affect for 1 second, and you have to wait for another bullet to hit to affect for another second. It really cuts down on how long the kick factor is actually effective, and even if it was effective for the full 8 seconds, you're still gambling because it's kind of like you turned the person you're playing into a button masher if they wanted to play because they're not sure which buttons they'll hit. And I'm not sure if you can easily put a game plan to turn those into wins easily. His fundamental problem is that his specials and kick factor just don't complement what he does with his normals. And for that, I would like to put him down here behind Jefailey, but I'm actually going to put him above Jefailey because he does have matchups that he can just use his normals to win easily, and he doesn't have that I'm gonna lose if you headshot me once type feel. And so gonna go in front of Jefailey, but they're very close. We've got Kenny next. Kenny is a really hard character to rate. He could be S if you get the right rolls, and he could be D if you just keep rolling the thing that is the worst of the matchup. But it's really hard to gauge kind of where he is in this list because of the fact that you're never not sure what you're going to get. And also, depending on who you're playing, those roles can differ. And so what makes Kenny special is his air special, which is Spirit Bullets. The amount of things you can do with Spirit Bullet in combination with other characters' normals kind of elevates him above the other characters. But that takes meter, and so trying to get to that air special is the problem that Kenny has. One good thing about him is he's short, and that means that other characters have to adjust their aiming to land headshots or even land a kill on him. All that being said, he's very meter reliant, and that means that he kind of lives and dies off his air special. If he doesn't have his air special, he's a subpar copy most of the time. Once he does get his air special, that unlocks his abilities and his threat. And I have to put him in inconsistent because that's basically what he is. I think he's probably the best of the inconsistent characters just because once you do build up his air bullet, he can be a monster. I know that Fencer can be a monster with sword, but Kenny is not as awful as Fencer is without his sword. My notable matchups here are Kung and Baz. and he has a plus against Fencer, so he's short enough that Fencer can't hit him with sword easily. And Kung Pao and Baz, Kung Pao for the meter pressure and Baz for the Spirit Bullet avoidance. I think that you might be able to include Redacted in there, but Redacted doesn't close down as fast as Kung Pao does. But I'd say that those are the matchups that are a little bit easier to gauge. The rest of the matchups really depend on who you roll as Kenny. All right, let's move on to Kick. Bring up the notes. All right, Kick. Definitely the best ground movement in the game. Whenever I play as Kick, I always feel like I can move back and forth very easily and quickly. Great meter build because of that movement. He moves with a lot of small steps, and every time you move with a step, you get a little bit of meter. And I mean, moving with him feels so good, and you just kind of build meter as you're moving around. His kick factor can be good. Unfortunately, he doesn't have that much height, but still, being fast and slapping a fast bonus on top of that with kick factor can definitely make Kick pretty scary. Unfortunately, he has this fundamental problem with the nature of staying low to the ground, and that's headshot concussion ratio. Most of your kills as Kick will be toe taps, and this game severely rewards headshots. Headshots are basically the combo in this game, and a lot of other characters have the ability to combo other characters. Kick has less of an ability to combo out other characters, and his low height makes him comboable. Compared to other characters, he just doesn't have that ability to turn a match around on a headshot. He can get headshots, but lining them up consecutively is pretty hard. His height does pose a lot of problems against other characters who just can jump out of his range. His ground special is called Party Starter, and it allows you to smash the ground, and it pops up the other character, basically forcing them into a concussed jump. But they still have access to their specials, so they can use their specials to get out of that problem. And for the most part, Party Starter costs more than most of the specials to get out of it. And so if you end up hitting Party Starter and not being able to commit, you're losing the meter race. And even if you do hit it, it's really hard to capitalize on it if it's at the wrong distance or you don't have the right height. It's just a really tough special to rely on. A lot of other characters, as far as air specials go, got options in the air to change their jump up landing. A lot of other characters like Dive can get out of that, where he can just fast fall. Shoals can float. Kenny has Spirit Bullet. Spencer has Tumble. Kick didn't get any air movement at all when the game got moved from vanilla to AE. And while New Angle can be strong with chasing down and punishing attacks, not having an option where you make a bad jump that you can kind of get out of it does kind of hinder him, and he only really can jump when it's absolutely safe. And he can try to use his air special to get out of it, but his air special also costs a lot of meter, and so it's not something he can do quite often. His best matchup is against S-Kill, and that's because the ground movement that he has can basically stifle S-Kill and can get out of the way against tricks, and he's low enough that he can avoid parry. We're definitely going to put him kind of the best of the fundamental issue characters here. Against most of the cast, he might have trouble with the high jumpers, but he can still kind of avoid being like dominated. All right, Kung. A lot of me wants to put her up here in S tier, and I might, but let's go over why I think that. Pros, unreactable distance. So when I say unreactable distance, I'm referring to if you're standing in front of Kung and she does a DK, how far you have to stand away from her to be able to react to it. The combination of her speed and her horizontal angle means that even if you hit kickback, there's a lot of times that she's still going to catch you. This one aspect kind of is the core of what Kung is about. It's controlling the space in front of her, and her movement can be a bit tough, but skilled Kung players can get to the right spaces and use that distance to pressure opponents. I mentioned airtime here. She's tied with Redacted for least amount of airtime. Normally when someone jumps, they're predictable, and we've been going over this point a lot. And Kung Pao spends less time in that jump because she has a very low jump and she has higher gravity than the rest of the cast, so she tends to jump up and land fairly quickly. When people do that, you have less of a window to punish them. This will come out again when I talk about Redacted, but her air time is very low, and just having less time for being punished is always going to be a good help. And when you add kick factor on top of all this, she becomes pretty damn good. Her unreactable distance gets even further. She can chase down from very far away. And her only real con is her height and her movement. The height part means that she can't really meet other characters in the air, but the fact that she can chase down makes up for that. She basically has to be able to just dodge them and wait for them to fall, and because she has that glide movement, she can catch them when they get down to the ground. Her best matchups here, Johnny Gat is probably her only like heavily favored matchup. Johnny Gat's best weapon is his kickback, and Kung Pao can actually chase it. So that makes the Johnny Gat matchup really bad for him because his best tool is nullified by Kung. Other than that, she's got a lot of good matchups against Markman, Uncle Sensei, Kick, Kenny, Mr. N. And her only real two bad matchups are Redacted and Baz. Baz, staying in the air, basically controls the pace at which two characters interact, and Baz can engage when he wants to, whereas Redacted has Duck or Feral, and her horizontal kick tends to go over Redacted, so she has to be very, very careful about not sailing over Redacted. Alright, I'm actually going to put her at most likely the front of A. She's very consistent. What would push her into exceptional is if she had a better ground special. Her ground special sets up a crack for her air special, which is Portal. I think Portal is a good air special. If she had another tool besides Portal that was better than the crack kick. The crack kick allows her to kind of change her head, allows her to back up just a little bit, but there's a lot better ground specials out there, and I feel like if she did have one, it would definitely put her in the exceptional category. Markman takes from his bag to look for items to give him like this precision mode, and having an upkick in a game where everyone's major attack is a dive kick is pretty good. But building that precision mode is random. You might get it, you might not. Moving from vanilla to AE, they severely hampered his normals. His speed, his meter build, they all dropped. And he also lost a little bit from his air special feint, where it doesn't go high enough anymore. It kind of just goes back more than it goes up. And it allows you to punish a lot less things than you could before. And they also added a bit of startup to his kick. If you're face to face with him, there's a lot of characters who can just kick him during the startup. He kind of has to rely on precision mode or getting good items to be a threat now. The item RNG can roll the bad way. If you roll oil, which I tend to think is probably one of the worst items because it gives your opponent the option to forward jump on you, it can be tough because you can't really defend with your bad normals. His matchups here are listed. He doesn't really have extreme matchups, but there are some that he's definitely ahead against Mr. N because he can use his kickback to get out from Mr. N's attack, and he can use his kick to kind of pressure the approach, plus throwing out items to stop N's approach. And once he gets upkick, N can't really do much against upkick. Against Kung Pao, he's basically trying to do what Kung Pao does, but Kung Pao just does it way better. Redacted can rush Markman down. I think Markman can only rely on Spring to kind of save him. Glue can also stop it, but Spring is definitely the better weapon. But you got, what, 2 items out of 5 that you have to roll a lot in the matchup. It's going to be tough. Jefailey, we talked about it. Jefailey can pressure him until he gets upkick. I think we're going to put Markman... I want to put him in the inconsistent category here. And I think I'm going to put him at the edge of Fencer. Could be in front of Fencer, could be behind Fencer. Like I said, the categories are very close. I think even like even the width or the height of it is still close as well. terms of you can still play characters in this level and still be good. You can still present problems to other players. So let's just put him here on the other side of Fencer. I still think Kenny's probably the dominant of this inconsistency because once you do get his tool, he's pretty strong, and even if you get the right roll, you'll be okay if you don't get his air bullet. So I still think that Kenny's probably in front of that category. All right, let's talk about Mr. N. All right, Mr. N. Definitely a good character. Does have a lot of polarizing matchups, as you can see. Let's talk about why he's good. His ground movement and his air movement are great. He has an ability that allows him to pause in the air and also get a little bit extra height in his secret double jump. And his ground movement with his minimum kick height and speed, coupled with his run back, allows him to just basically position himself where he needs to be when he needs to be. He's not as good as kick in ground movement because he just can't advance as fast, but he's pretty close because of his speed. And he's also one of the top people who can do headshot chains with the way that he controls his air kicks, and he's also susceptible to being headshot himself, except he will not be headshot the very first time because he has that neck pillow, basically allowing him one bad mistake. Granted, he is pretty bad once he does get headshot, but he doesn't have to worry about that for at least one round. The things that work against him is he has a very large hurt box, and his hitbox location is underneath him. I mentioned this before, where you have to basically sit on other characters to kill them, and so that kind of presents very close shaves where you're trying to come close enough that you can mount an attack to the point where you're kind of playing on that edge of being hit because he's so large. And hopefully you can utilize all the movement options that he has to get in and get those headshots. He does rely on meter. Without meter, he can't do his tricks. It will take a very small amount of time for him to get that meter, and so it's not that much of a con, but it is something to note about Mr. N. Probably he's the only person who really gives Redacted trouble. The way that his kick angle and his air floating line up against Redacted, Mr. N can put Redacted in a tough situation where they have to fear the headshot, because once they do get headshot, Mr. N has a good chance of continuing that combo. Does well against Dr. Shoals and Jefailey. Jefailey, for the same reason as Redacted, and just get above and chain those headshots. Shoals typically has problems with Mr. N, who can jump high. Anybody who can get above Dr. Shoals can give her trouble, and Mr. N can do that very quickly and kind of stay above there with his air specials. He also does well against Stream. Stream has a hard time chasing down Mr. N, who can get above easily and stay above whenever he wants. You notice that his only really bad matchup is Fencer, but he does have a few other matchups he has troubles with. He is pretty strong, and even in those bad matchups, he can still put up a fight. I think I want to put him right here after Kong. I think that even though he does have bad matchups, the fact that he has a lot of overwhelming matchups, I think I would put that above Dive, who's kind of like the middle of the road. And so I don't think he's as consistent as Kong, though, because Kong has a lot less bad matchups, and while she doesn't have like extremely overwhelming matchups like Mr. N, she can still hold her own against most of the cast. All right, Redacted is very good, and the one thing I want to highlight is Feral and Hitbox. So these are the two things that make Redacted pretty strong, and that's Feral is a great complement to Redacted because Redacted has a hard time retreating, and basically her kickback doesn't move too far, and she can't really rush down like Kick, although she is pretty fast. She moves at about the same pace, I would say, as Mr. N, but her foot is a bit more outstretched. As she's coming in, the window to hit her is very small, because if you try to counter her and you end up hitting her in the shin, it'll most likely be a loss or a trade, and normally that's a win against other characters. And so being able to close in and have a very small window to be punished makes her really, really good. And most of the time, if you do see a foot-to-foot clash, Redacted's most likely going to win or trade those. We mentioned airtime before. She has the highest gravity in the cast at 4, I think, and when she jumps up and jumps and lands, she's in the air about the exact same amount of time as Kung is, and Kung only jumps so high. Redacted jumps a lot higher and doesn't have to stay in the air long for you to set up a punishing attack. Not only that, the angle that Redacted kicks are just naturally good for headshots. Sometimes you'll see her get a headshot with her shin due to the very, very good hitbox. Her only real bad matchup, as I said earlier, was Mr. N. Other than that, she's got a list of matchups that she's strong in and some matchups that she's very, very good in. Fencer, she can duck and is defensive. Against Baz, she can rush down Baz before Baz gets enough meter to use his air special, and basically can pressure him into situations where he has to spend his meter on air special to get out, and then the chase starts again. And all the while, she can build up kick factor. The speed against S-Kill is kind of what makes the S-Kill matchup hard. Most of the time, S-Kill's only real answer to Redacted is parry. Trick can be reacted to and ducked. S-Kill has a hard time finding a way to hit Redacted without landing a parry. The kick's just too slow for Redacted speed. And that's similar to Uncle Sensei, where Uncle Sensei's kick is so slow that in order for Uncle Sensei to land a hit, it has to be in really close quarters, and Redacted speed excels in those situations. I would say that I'm putting Redacted here on S because of the fact that not only does the matchup chart look like Kung's, but also both specials are very useful. The one that puts it over the top is she has the best hitbox in the game. Being able to win trades is can be very, very key when there's so many kicks that are so close. And that just puts her in a league of her own compared to the rest of the cast. Alright, S-Kill. Once upon a time, S-Kill had teleport jumps, and parry was crazy good because it had very, very little recovery where you can spam it. But ever since AE, a lot of people kind of frown on this character because his kick is very slow. He can't really pressure a concussion. Most of his offense relies on his trick, and trick is his answer to almost everything in terms of it's his main offensive tool. He doesn't really have a kick that is great, and so trick is kind of his cheat code to get past that. And because of that, he's really meter dependent. In order for him to utilize trick, he has to build meter, and luckily he can build meter pretty fast. But for the most part, having that dependency on meter makes him really, really inconsistent. He needs to build first. He can't capitalize on headshots, so when he gets kills, it's because he's doing great tricks or he's utilizing his kick factor, which both take time to build up. And if you get into positions where you just can't build that up, or if you miss with your trick, then you go right back into like fighting uphill again because of his very slow movements. That being said, I think that his defense is okay with his double jump and utilizing parry. Whenever you do hit a parry, it's one of the most satisfying feelings in the game. The sound cue and the animation just look great, and hopefully the headshot feels even better when it lands. There are certain characters where even if you hit parry, you might not get a headshot and you might miss. And you're particularly tall, so protecting your head is important. His best matchup is definitely against Stream. Stream's slow kick will run into parry and can't really chase down a double jumping S-Kill. The angle at which S-Kill moves doesn't allow Stream that much offense, because if he comes in with a slow kick, he could get parried, and if he doesn't come in and stifle the meter build, then Trick can get above a Stream who is kind of floaty. So Stream has one of the lowest gravities in the game besides Jefailey with a big head, and Stream can kind of be in the air a lot, and when you're in the air a lot, that's good for S-Kill, who's trying to just teleport to you to get a kick. Another plus here is against Jefailey. Using teleport against a big head makes an even bigger target for the headshot. S-Kill does have problems against anybody who can move along the ground well or is fast, and kick is probably his worst nightmare with the low kicks. We're gonna put S-Kill somewhere over here. I wanna put him either here or here. I think that he doesn't have that many bad matchups, and he actually has a really good matchup against Stream. And so I think we'll put a skill here. I don't know. It's very close. We'll go with that for now. If I decide to look back and change it later, we could do that at the end. So Stream is one of the characters I would feel when I first started playing. I thought he was nigh unplayable. His kick was so slow. Trying to understand like how to move with his double jump and his slow kick was very tough. Divekick was dominating with Stream, and just watching him play just opened my mind to rethinking what I thought I knew about Divekick. That being said, I want to put Stream over in A because he's consistently good. He doesn't really have a super bad matchup besides S-Kill. I think this one should be right here. He has decent matchups against the rest of the cast. So when Stream gets kick factor, he can set up attacks that just are unavoidable. He can set up a high-low combo if you let him. Trying to pressure Stream about not getting meter is really hard because he's really defensive with his kickback speed. He can gust out of the way and punish you instead. He does that against a lot of attacks, and chasing Stream is a losing proposition just because he can get out of the way really easily. And because he can steer his kick, he's also a headshot chainer, and that's kind of going to be a big theme here, that if you can capitalize on headshots, then your stock just goes higher, because you can get that momentum kill where you get one headshot and it just moves into another headshot, and pretty soon you're up 4-1. His cons is obviously his slow kick and his slow movement forward. In order to move Stream, you have to be very deliberate. But players who understand that will do well with him. They'll understand when it's safe to move forward and when it's safe to go for a chase kick. I think that we're gonna put him either in front or behind Dive. So I don't think he's as oppressive as Mr. N, but he's kind of like very similar to Dive. His matchup lists right here, they don't have like a lot listed because it's fairly even across the board. He does have that one game against S-Kill that's pretty bad, but that kind of evens out with his good matchups. You know, we'll just put it there for now, like this. I might move it here at the end, but we'll see. Let's talk about Baz. Baz is a character that went through a lot of changes. He's basically a new character since vanilla. And Baz has this special ability where he's basically like Spider-Man, where he shoots out a web and he can swing. And he can let go of that swing in various positions and carry that momentum. And then he can use his second kick to stop that momentum and do it all over again. And at the end of that, he can use his air special to zip across somewhere else if he wants to. And all of this leads to very, very good movement in general. He can inch forward a little bit by canceling his kicks, but it's not great ground movement. But he is heavily reliant on his air special because when he's in the air, he can get out of any type of bad kick. His only con is that building that takes 6 kicks, and that's a decent amount. Not to mention that all that air movement allows him to headshot chain. I've seen Axum Jinx play in tournaments where he builds 2 kicks of meter and then still goes in for a headshot chain, and that's how easy it is for Baz to kind of get in there and have a good shot at hitting combos, is that he can even squeeze in time to build meter along the way. I wouldn't say that he's as good as Shoals or Mr. N, but the Baz can definitely light up those headshots, and definitely he belongs in A. Now, where he belongs is tough. I think that he's kind of similar to N, where he's got some polarizing matchups and a decent amount of positive matchups. I'd say Kung Pao is his best matchup just because, like I said earlier with Kung, he controls the sky. Gat is actually really tough too. Gat's kick is too low that he can't really touch Baz that much. This Fencer matchup is dependent on a feature that where he can lightning Fencer's sword. But he does have some tough matchups, and I think we'll put him in front of Stream just because he's got that volatility where he dominates a lot of matchups. All right, Uncle Sensei. He's pretty slow, kind of like Stream, but he has a lot of things going for him as well. He has two angles, just like Dr. Shoals, where he has a horizontal kick and a steep kick, and he can switch between them at will. His hitbox is pretty good. His dive punch is, I'd probably say, third behind Redacted and Stream's kick. There's a good chance that dive punch can win against a lot of the cast, except for the two that we mentioned. His cons are his ground movement. It's really tough to get Sensei moving because of his slow kick and the fact that you have to deal with his stances. If you're in control of his stances, you still have to worry about what's the proper movement to move forward against that character, because there's a lot of options in his ground movement that just push him too close because of the way that he does his horizontal kick. And when he's in his handstands, he has a very tall hurt box. I think it is the tallest of the cast because his feet are just standing up there. He's very good at being defensive because of his air special. His air special is super jump, which allows him to get above anybody really, really quickly. And that does allow him the ability to headshot chain. Definitely not as good as Shoals, but up there with N and Baz. Ground special is oh yeah, super jump. Sorry about that. This should be ground special. Thanks for Bloodlure in the chat to correct me here. His air special is actually stance, but I think of that as almost the normal because you use it so often and it's so cheap. I think I'm giving more special attention to ground special because it does take a little bit of time to build, but it's a very good tool. It's right up there with Feral as being both defensive and offensive. You can use it to run, you can use it to set an attack. Overall, it's really good. And it puts him into a category where there's no one that can really use their height leverage on Uncle Sensei, because Uncle Sensei can get higher than everyone else. Yeah, add to that ability to chain headshots, definitely puts him in the A tier. And I do want to put him kind of either here or here. And I might want to put him in front of N. I think normally I had him here, but I think that he's consistent enough that he doesn't really have very bad matchups. Just a couple bad matchups. And he doesn't really have too much off as far as like really good matchups, but I think across the board he does better. He always has options in almost every matchup, that to the point where if you pick him, you're not worried about a counter pick too much. Even against Kong, he still has tools. I think that's it. Let me take a look at this to see if there's anything I want to move around. But as you can see, I didn't put anyone in unplayable. I don't think anyone is unplayable in this game, and I think that you can do well even with any of the characters down here. And this is only my opinion. I'm pretty sure that everyone has their own views and their own experiences to bring to the table. At Divekick Infinite, we have a Discord, and if you want to join our Discord, hit !Discord in the chat, get a link. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be a link in the description. But go to the character channel, there'll be a posted tier list, and I'm hoping to see your tier list and your discussion of why you think my tier list is totally wrong. I think that's it.